welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. When it comes to Damian Cowell, the only word that accurately sums up his career is prolific. A staple of the Melbourne scene for close to 5 decades now, Cowell has been involved in more bands than I've had hot dinners. On the prehistoric side of things, there's bands such as Tall Stories and I Can Run, and then there's a rather well-known group called TISM. That's probably the band he's best known for, with the group's anonymous, pseudonymous members releasing 6 albums and nabbing 2 ARIA Awards across their initial 22-year span. They also boast one of the most passionate fan bases in Australian music history as well, and when the group announced an unexpected reunion in 2022, fans ensured it resulted in some of the band's best attended gigs of their career. But we're not here to focus on just TISM. In fact, we barely do in our chat, because Cowell has also been a member of Root, the DC3, and has been the eponymous frontman of Damian Cowell's Disco Machine. Currently, he's one half of the Arseless Chaps, a new duo formed with comedian Tony Martin that promises to operate in the same vein as names like Groove Armada, Daft Punk, The Presets, and Barlow Chambers. Well, maybe not the last one. I've had a few chats with Damian over the years, and recently he was kind enough to agree to a lengthy discussion about his career and myriad projects ahead of the Arseless Chaps' upcoming tour of Australia. So before we get into it, I strongly urge you to buy a ticket to the Arseless Chaps' upcoming gigs, and once you're done doing that, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Damian Cowell, thank you very much for joining this episode of the Trusty Chords podcast.
Thank you very much, Tyler. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to watch your millions of CDs in the background because, this is a chat about, I think what hopefully might come across in our chat is that I'm as much of a music fan as a performer of music. So, although I have to point out, that just because I love music doesn't mean I love all music. And last night, the people across the road had a party, and they had a cover band playing clearly in their backyard, so we could hear every song clear as day in our bedroom while we were trying to read. And because that's what you do on a big Saturday night in my house. And it was very interesting. Like, I didn't mind I'm quite fine with cover bands. I'm in one myself, really. But butchering Paul Kelly, I didn't mind. But when they did Groove Is in the Heart, that's when I really wanted to go and pay a visit to their meter box. So, but it was, and one thing really struck me was that they finished their set. I mean, I know their set as intimately as if I had a set list myself, but they finished their set with what's it called, 500 Miles by the Proclaimers. And it really made me think, like, those guys, the Proclaimers, they really wrote a song there which in the hands of a cover band has the power to really fucking irritate, especially when it gets to that bit where they go, where they trade the does, one does it like, music has the power to irritate, which I think is kind of lost now that we all have streaming and we can choose whatever music we like. People listen to the radio less. I grew up listening to the radio, so that meant, you would be hearing stuff that really shut you off just as much as stuff you really liked. And hating bands is a real thing, is a joy, I feel, to have in your life. And I'd like to apologize, not that anyone will be listening that does hate my music, but I would like to apologise out there to the people who I've, annoyed all the years. Like, really, when you think about it, sort of, the stop sign must be really fucking annoying to people who don't like that band. So yeah, music is the theme, and I hope it comes across anyway. Anyway, over to you. Sorry.
No, that's a beautiful intro, actually. Actually, just how you sort of mentioning the idea of like like streaming services taking away this ability to hate music. Like I've actually been sort of making a point of looking back on those albums that have been unfairly sort of disparaged over the years. Like I went back recently and re-listened to Lou Reed's Metal Machine music.
Oh
It's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's really not as bad as people say. There's like
yeah,
I mean, it's not
yeah.
the sort of thing you're going to pop on at a or you're going to have a cover band play that on a Saturday night or anything. But it's
Finally, yeah,
yeah, could have been a bit more interesting, that's for sure. Better than
yeah,
Delight.
yeah. They're renovating across the road. Yeah, that's what it would have been like. Yeah,
So I guess what I love to do at the start of these podcasts is I love to sort of go back in time to where a love of music first formed. So we've already sort of touched on the fact that you're a bit of a music fan or you're involved
yeah,
in the world of music. But for you, Damien, do you have a recollection of your earliest memory of when music first resonated with you?
yeah. I mean, I cannot sort of give specifics to the situation, but I certainly have a very clear memory of how it all happened for me. And it's a really boring answer because it's the Beatles, right? And it's sort of like for people of my generation or even sort of the next generation, I imagine that this is a regular answer. But and I'll never know whether it was because it was the Beatles, like, or they just happened to be the artist who exploded into my life. But because of that first experience, I think I saw them on TV or something. It totally changed my life. Maybe my life was always going to go that way, but that was like, you know, that's what I want to do. That's it, really. That's all I want to do, apart from sort of playing in the grand final for St Kilda, which
There's still time, don't worry.
but yeah, and I do remember my parents had a open fire, and or they did have, maybe before I was around, they had one, but they still had the tools on the fireplace, included this small black shovel, and that is my first memory of me going like this with a black shovel to a fireplace shovel to the Beatles. So, but yeah, the Beatles were like the music, but the whole kind of idea of it, of these heroic young good-looking men taking the world by storm. I think, not that obviously I processed it in that way, but that was so exciting to me, that was all I ever sort of wanted to be. And I didn't necessarily, like, I wasn't necessarily a Beatles fan in a big way. Like, I never had a Beatles album. I never bought a Beatles album until I was in my late teens. But the first record I ever got, which was bought for me by my parents, was All My Loving, the EP. And so, yeah, like many people, they made me want to do that somehow. And obviously it worked because I'm still doing it.
You're still emulating the whole Lennon McCartney partnership
Yeah,
in some way.
yeah,
But I mean,
yeah.
like, was there anything specifically that you sort of like when you were hearing the Beatles in those early days that you were sort of, whether it be intangibly or something, sort of thinking that's what's connecting with me, or was it just this sort of, I guess, the sound coming into your life and you sort of thinking this is comforting. I like this comfort. How do I keep attaining this?
Yeah, you're putting an intellectual process onto a visceral, emotive
Yes.
experience. It's only, I guess, as the years have passed, being able to kind of analyze what that was. But the sound of ringing guitars and harmony voices, I think, and melody. So those are the things that sort of stuck with me all these years. And so I've always had a kind of a Beatlesque idea of what flavor of ice cream I like. I use the term ice cream because I think music is just like food or whatever. It's you can't argue A over B unless you're talking about, I don't know, Nickelback. But it's what makes the chemicals in your brain go off. And so those were the things that I think the Beatles had. Apart from that, when you sort of look back on the Beatles, they also had other things too going in their favour, like they had wit. In their interviews, they were witty. They were sort of witty and intelligent. And I think that's sort of probably been something I've been attracted to as well over the years. Is I've certainly always admired witty performers. They are very thin on the ground, but and intelligent performers too. So, if you combine all of those things, and the thing was that the Beatles were, like by the time I was aware of the Beatles, they were a world phenomenon. And you don't get that anymore these days. Perhaps Taylor Swift, but they were like the Beatles were a sort of a front page news thing. They could change popular culture. So it was a heady mix, I suppose, of things that I now reflect back on. That at the time, like I was a little kid, I was already buying records. Like when I was, I reckon, grade 3 was when I started buying records. So I got started reasonably early, I think, and also I never really had an ambition to be. I never formalised a sense that I wanted to be in music. It was just that's all I'm interested in.
Right. So then when you were buying some of those early records, who were the artists that you were sort of attracted to, I guess? Like you obviously mentioned the Beatles, but were you going out and buying, well, no, you mentioned you didn't have a Beatles record until you about 17 or so. So that
Yeah.
avoids that question. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a couple of singles by the Beatles, but no. I moved on. So I had an older sister, which is often a big influence in people's lives when they're into music, is an older sibling. So my older sister Moira was a big fan of Creedence Clearwater Revival, so they were really big in our house for a while. And but the first artists that I totally adopted was Rod Stewart and the Faces. So my first album was A Nod's as Good as a Wink to a Blind Horse by the Faces, and I realised over the years that Rod Stewart became something totally different to what he was in the early 70s. And it was hard to explain to people that, because their idea of Rod Stewart, well, I mean, now Rod Stewart's just some kind of weird, detached, sort of like the Queen or something, but for most of from the late 70s onwards, Rod Stewart became this kind of bizarre vaudevillian sort of entertainer who pursued blonde women half his age and lived in fucking Beverly Hills or whatever, right? But he was the opposite to that. When I got into Rod Stewart, it was in his period. His period of these cracking solo albums, like Every Picture Tells a Story and Never a Dull Moment, which had the persona. Rod Stewart's persona was this sort of everyman, fallible guy, but witty about it as well. Even the liner notes on his records were really, and that kind of created for me this sense of, without me sort of planning this or intellectualizing this, it was like, that's the kind of guy I want to be. Is that sort of not pretentious or well, I fucking hope I'm not pretentious, but that but still capable of doing good things and of being artistic, but not making a big deal about it, kind of downplaying it. I got that vibe from Rod Stewart, and he wrote some great songs, and he was a great interpreter of songs as well. The Faces, if anyone is listening and wants to check out the Faces, their version of Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine is one of the great rock ensemble performances, I reckon, of that whole era. They just, that's a great song, and Marvin Gaye's version's a great version, but whoa, what the Faces did. They were a great band, and underrated too. Very much sort of in the same. They were very much in the same oeuvre as the Stones. So obviously they were never going to be remembered by history as great as the Stones. But I think they were a fabulous band. So every picture, every picture tells a story. Never a dull moment. Nods as good as a wink to a blind horse. I mean, even the album titles, a little bit of thought went into them. Or they were kind of these, and they had this reputation for being ramshackle, witty, drunken guys. So it was it was a very kind of enticing thing to be into. So they were really my big band until I hit puberty, and then I had a bit of a Led Zeppelin phase, which I think everybody goes through, sort of like acne, but Led Zeppelin's pretty good, but I don't play Led Zeppelin records anymore. I don't reach for my Led Zeppelin collection, but I do play the Faces. So they've definitely stuck around.
It's actually very funny sort of hearing that because, like, at least when I was growing up, my mother's favorite artist was Rod Stewart, and my father's favorite artist was Led Zeppelin. So I'm sort of like, it's sort of odd sort of hearing this sort of story from yourself, and realizing my upbringing, though quite a bit later, was very similar in terms of the music I was exposed to. And growing up around all these Rod Stewart LPs and everything, looking at the liner notes, and you are sort of getting this sense that he's a bit of an interesting guy. He's not just a one-dimensional figure who was making this music, which is later going to be reinterpreting the Great American Songbook. It's he was very interesting in those early days. I guess he still is to a degree, but look, enough about it, old mate Rod Stewart. So I guess going from this bit of a musical upbringing of listening to all this music, when for you did you actually start playing music? Like, when did the idea of actually making music present itself to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were cracking on. We wanted to make music when we were in primary school. So we had a fake band in primary school called Thunderbirds, the Thunderbirds, and we would go around to this guy Peter's house, and this was me and Peter and Sean Kelly, who ended up being I ended up sort of doing a lot of music with after that. So we were even doing that, like with tennis rackets, miming to songs, drawing sideys with brown pen on there, and Sean's mum actually visited my mum one night, unbeknownst to me, and complained about this. Thought that I was being a bad influence on him by bringing him into this miming to music. But the actual first thing. The first music was a band called Abros, and I use the term band loosely because that implies some kind of structure and membership and organisation and even songs. But basically, me and this Peter Fowler, in his house with his upright piano. Making a cassette which was sort of 90% hiss and bad singing, and even at one point I actually did this sort of scratching on the on records. My parents had this classical, this sort of I think it was a big hit. My dad was sort of into very mainstream versions of classical music. So I pinched one of his albums. I was doing this sort of scratching thing. Not, we're not talking DJ style or anything, but I like to think I was ahead of my time, given that was, about, what was it? Sort of 1974 or something. So Abros was the name Zorba spelt backwards, because Zorba was the pool parlour in Springy Road that we used to frequent to smoke cigarettes back in the day, and that was about as creative as it got. But then Sean Kelly joined, and I think I was fortunate really to have a lot of very confident alpha male type characters in my life because I had all this grand I had this love of music and I had this grand ambition to make music, but my parents were dead against it. So there was no way I was ever, and plus my naturally kind of timid nature, I was never going to do it without other people, you know, and they were the other people. So Peter Fowler and Sean Kelly and this other guy called Greg Wilmot. We made another hissy cassette called Abros, and then actually started rehearsing in Sean's garage, and that became the band known as Kestrel Hawk. And to think today that I would be talking about Kestrel Hawk, back in that garage, it makes me chuckle to think that on a podcast I'm discussing the works of Kestrel Hawk.
You didn't know what a podcast was back then, did you?
Oh, absolutely, that's right. So, but here we are. Yep, that was really the first band, apart that wasn't just making hissy cassettes. Kestrel Hawk was the band that performed in a public situation.
And how were those early performances? Because I always like to go back when I speak to people. If they say, "Oh, I was writing songs at the age of 10," and I say, "Do those songs still hold up?" They say they don't. So the first performances of the band like Kestrel Hawk, were they the sort of thing that people would have actually gone along to and said, "This is money well spent"?
Fuck no, no. I mean, we our first performance was 2 songs at the Springvale High School Fete, and gave us a completely false sense of our own immortality because we were the only musical act on, or at least we were the only band on at this talent show thing. There were jugglers, I guess, and dance acts and calisthenics, and on comes the band, and it was a high school hall full of people. So they went nuts, and we went on and did a shaky version of Paper Plane by Status Quo, and Greg, the bass player and singer, was writing his own songs, and he was actually very advanced, I reckon, for his age. Like the songs he wrote were really stood up for. I mean, who knows now if you would look back, but certainly at the time they were very advanced. And I was the drummer because circumstance, really. Just there was. Greg had coerced his mother into buying him a bass. Sean had one guitar lesson. I think Peter could play piano or whatever. So somebody had to be, and Sean's younger brother had half a drum kit. So there you go, Damien, you do that. And so I ended up there, which was entirely in keeping with my personality at the time, which was too scared to stand up the front or whatever. But I mean, I even at that stage, I very much, because of my whole obsession with music, I wasn't obsessed with drumming, or I was obsessed with the whole fucking thing. So album covers and how the band speaks and how they look and the history of music and everything, and how a song goes, like the entirety of a song. I was very much already like that. But when you're up the back on the drum kit, you don't really have a lot of influence on the way that goes. And like I said before, there were these very strong personalities who kind of drove that. But yeah, Kestrel Hawk did have a couple of actual songs that sounded like songs, but its career ended in a sort of a small puff of smoke, really, because we played the Noble Park Youth Club. That was our proper first gig, and there were 6 kids there. I think we played a cricket club barbecue where no one gave a fuck. There was never going to be much of a future for Kestrel Hawk, but it was a start. Everyone's got to start somewhere, so that was it.
So after all of your huge fan base decided to burn all their Kestrel Hawk shirts in in protest of you guys, I guess
Yeah.
fading
Yeah.
away to obscurity. The next project that you had, that was Tall Stories, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Excellent.
So, and Tall Stories was, I'm trying to remember because I guess to the listener a little bit of a spoiler. I've done a bit of research in the past. Tall Stories also had Sean in it, didn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, Tall Stories did, and also Greg
That's right. Yes.
and initially, and we were joined by Eugene Sester, who um, could play a bit of piano, but was never involved in our musical pursuits until we left school. So at school, like I went to grade prep with Eugene and with Sean. So we go back a very, very long way. But Eugene was kind of like my friend over there. He wasn't my friend in the music world. He was kind of my friend over there who was interested in soccer. I think that was sort of our connection. But he came on board, and that's how. And then Tall Stories evolved a bit. Greg wanted to become a folk singer, and he went off, and we recruited Jack, who was actually a guitarist, but he took on the job of bass. He was kind of convinced by Eugene, who has an extremely almost like a charismatic personality, a charismatic Christian evangelist personality. He managed to get Jack to join, and so that was so you had Jack on bass and sort of lead vocals, Sean on guitar, Eugene on keyboards, and his fucking nibs still sitting up the back.
And then Tall Stories, they lasted a bit longer than Kestrel Hall, but it still wasn't exactly, you weren't exactly reaching lofty heights, were you?
No, and I mean, I think like a lot of this was to do with the fact that we didn't really have a clue about what do you do? Like, how do you get a gig? You know, we were living in Springvale, and even though like we'd left school or whatever, the first year I was working, and we were all still living in Springvale. But there was very much this sense of divide, like we are on the outside, and so getting a gig was just cold calling people. We didn't really have any contacts or friends of friends, or didn't get invited to the right parties. So, you know, it would be like these one-offs. So we would cold call. We actually got in touch with Dolores, who I don't know, I can't remember her surname, but she wrote a book about the Crystal Ballroom, which was a big, you know, like the punk venue where sort of all your Nick Caves and stuff got their start. And Dolores was booking the Exford Hotel in the city, and that was our first proper gig. I think we played a couple of other little things before that, which were just self-organised. But yeah, we kind of got these one-off gigs, never got invited back. We got that whole conversation at one of them. Oh yeah, I can't pay you tonight, guys, but I'll get you another gig. You know, that one. But you know, there was always very much this sense of we don't seem to know how to be like one of those bands that you see in the gig guide. It just felt like we didn't know the way to become that. We went in a battle of the bands. I mean, and weren't good enough or weren't interesting enough to get anything out of that. I mean, there was another band on called Men at Work who were also considered not interesting enough to get anywhere, which just goes to show, you know, that, like, I'm not saying Tall Stories is a great forgotten gem, but it's all very much chance. Being in a band and being successful or not being successful is to do with a lot of serendipitous accidents. And we were a long way from, you know, having any serendipitous accidents happen. So that was the end of Tall Stories, really.
And I actually just had to look it up. I had to look it up just now. The Dolores' last name was Dolores San Miguel.
Oh yeah, okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
just to make sure credit is given where credit is due, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey there, folks. I just wanted to jump in here to quickly note something. The train spotters amongst us might realise that I skipped over mentioning Damian's band I Can Run, but I assure you there is a very good reason for that. Namely that I'm an idiot who forgot all about it. I'm glad we cleared that up, so let's get back to the action. So look, after Tall Stories we do get to a different band, and I am certainly aware there is a little bit of reticence when it comes to talking about your best known band, which is TISM.
Yeah.
In fact, when we initially spoke, I was actually wondering at first if there's a way where I could do this podcast where I sort of approach the topic and just sort of swerve off, making it like a little bit of a TISM-esque way of actually just summing it up. But it is obviously a necessity to mention when it comes to the chronological aspect of the career. So I'm obviously not going to go deep into the weeds of the band, as I'm sure many listeners would love me to do. But I guess I do want to ask, when TISM first, I want to say formed, but I guess coalesced is a better word to use. What was the vision, if anything? Were you thinking this is my ticket to selling out, stadiums, or were you viewing it as a way to, for a bunch of guys to have some fun?
Yeah. Okay. Before I am happy to answer that question, Tyler. And thank you for being understanding about the question of TISM. I don't like talking about TISM as much as I like to avoid talking about TISM as much as I possibly can. And there's three reasons for that. The first reason is that I'm the only person who is really visible all the time outside of TISM. Therefore, I am contactable, and I do not want to be. The last thing I want to be is the guy you ring up when you want to quote about TISM, or, hey, Damian, you want to come and put on a balaclava? And that's so. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want people in my inbox asking me questions about TISM, the quick quote TISM guy. That's one reason. Another reason is that TISM is, if you want TISM, what you get is the TISM experience. So you get the only information about TISM comes from these weird encounters with Ron and Humphrey, and that is the TISM experience. And some people don't like it, I'm sure, and some people do, but that's what you get, and don't get upset. If you want TISM, that's it. So I'm not going to then turn around and start being a regular guy talking regularly about TISM. And the third thing too is just kind of out of respect for the other people in TISM. It's not my band, and it's so therefore I don't feel that I should be speaking on their behalf. However, you did ask a very good question, which I can answer, because it's sort of talking about how did it happen to me, and it was I guess two big things happened in my life. One was the Roland TR-606 drum machine. So I took toward the end. So Tall Stories turned into this band called I Can Run. It was basically the same guys, just developing our musical ability and trying very, very hard, still coming up against what was that sort of weird sense of a brick wall of not getting anywhere. And by the time it almost petered out, I got into New Order. And New Order, I wouldn't say, like, they only just played this weekend, I think. I wouldn't consider myself a massive New Order fan. I got a lot of their stuff, but it's mainly because their album covers are so beautiful. So I wouldn't really consider myself a huge fan. But two tracks in particular, Everything's Gone Green and Blue Monday, were like, there were drum machines in that, and it wasn't the first time I'd heard a drum machine, but anything to do with like that sort of music was totally alien, or at that point in my life was sort of you might have heard it on a Stevie Wonder track. So it was like part of that kind of black music, I guess, that I could totally not relate to, or sort of that was sort of that kind of grown R&B music for grown-ups. But he was a band that had were that sort of grey overcoat wearing indie sort of image, which I was totally in love with back in that sort of post-punk era, who were starting to play this kind of dance music. And so they did it in this incredibly unfunky sort of way, but it helped me kind of cross over. So I actually went out and bought a drum machine out of because I kind of, I don't know, I just suddenly got this bug to go and do it. And that completely changed my life because I then wasn't a drummer anymore because I had a machine that could do it, and it was very small and, unlike carting a drum kit around. So that was one thing that had a huge effect on me. And another thing was my friend Peter. And so my friend Peter came along, had nothing to do with any of the bands we'd been in. And though I bought that drum machine, I Can Run was just not doing it, hardly doing anything, or had virtually sort of stopped giving a shit. It was almost like, in fact, my music career was over in my head. I was coming to the realization that, you better fucking start your get a teaching job and start your real life, And this guy Peter, who was my friend, but not a musician in any way, wrote these joke poems, and we made a cassette. And everything after that was purely by accident, and to this, in the sense that people naturally assume that there was some kind of concept. There was none. There was no right. We're going to do this and that and this. Like when you, a lot of people used to compare us to Devo. That was a band with a concept. TISM was not a band that had a concept. We had a lot of ideas, and we put those ideas into practice, but it wasn't to any particular goal, and it wasn't even to go, we are going to subvert the music industry. No, never a fucking conversation. I didn't want to subvert the music industry. I wanted to be a success in the music industry. It was just that was how TISM became, and that was a result of my friend Peter, who wrote these poems and had none of the prejudices that the rest of us had about music, which was you have to be cool and you have to look cool and you have to be like the bands on television and all that. He just didn't really give a shit about any of that. And because that all went out the window, we could be ourselves, or at least I could be myself. And because of circumstance, I was the singer. Again, nothing to do with planning. I just happened to be, it was like musical chairs. I happened to be standing at the mic when the music stopped. And that is kind of what the next 20 years of my life would be. But it was all sort of a series of those serendipitous accidents that I spoke about before, because we never planned any of it. We certainly didn't think we were going to be famous or anything. And it completely took us by delightful surprise. But there was never any concept. The concept formed, I guess, in retrospect. So retrospectively, we came up with an idea of what TISM was, but that wasn't until further down the track. So, and then 20 years passed.
It is actually a little fascinating hearing you sort of say how nothing was really considered at the start, considering that you're talking about being, up the back on drums and pretty much, while you're bashing away, you're thinking, I've got all these ideas running away. But then, these ideas don't happen to sort of, again, coalesce when TISM forms. It's just sort of everything sort of happens and all these different personalities come together and they start creating. And I guess the sum of that creativity is this band, which is incredibly hard to categorize and somehow almost I can't even think of the word right now, somehow it manages to sort of rise to the top of the public consciousness, which I can only imagine was a little bit weird for yourself.
Oh yeah, but it did unlock that. I can't think of a less pretentious word than auteur, but what I wanted to be was an auteur. That is the person who conceptualizes the whole thing. So even though I've just said there was no concept, I was, from the moment that band started, I was thinking about album covers and how should the whole song sound? What is the sound of this band? Um, it was an accident in the sense that I had a drum machine. Therefore, the drum machine became part of the sort of sound, and it was very much like a combination of individuals creating that sound. But in my little world, I now had the opportunity to sort of be a strong voice and kind of I guess annoyingly bossy in that sense that I was, because it was like, here's an opportunity for not that I was sitting there going, here's an opportunity, but it was just unlocking all that thing that I always had, but never had the opportunity to sort of bring to the band I was in, the sense of being able to have this is the big picture approach. Here's how it's going to look. Here's how it's going to sound. So yeah, it wasn't. It certainly was like we were, I guess, organised in our thinking. It wasn't just random, but it was very much in the early days. It was like a whole bunch of ideas, mud against the wall, and everybody, I guess, was contributing too. So everybody has very much a role to play in the concept that later formed. But yeah, for me, it was super exciting to be able to influence the way the band, grew. Was a thing I always wanted to do, I guess. Just never really had the opportunity.
You sort of mentioned this before, but you are someone who is typically known to be a little bit self-effacing. There's a real sense of modesty where you sort of seem constantly surprised that people actually want to listen to the music that you make. And personally, I think you and I quite alike in this sense because very often I think, why am I bothering with a podcast? Who the hell is going to listen?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm glad your name's at the top. But this isn't about me. Was there ever a moment where you sort of realized that not only are people listening to the music of a band like TISM, but actually enjoying it as well? Because I can imagine coming from the likes of Abros and things like that, and then to where you are now, you're sort of realizing, oh shit, I actually have a bit of a platform. People are coming to the shows. People are buying the records. When did this happen? Like, was there a specific sort of moment that sticks in your mind where you realize we've sort of made it, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think so. Without kind of going into too much detail about that, it certainly was black and white. There wasn't like this ramp that went from tall stories to TISM where I was going, yes, it's getting better. I am becoming more respected. It went from fuck all to boom, to suddenly these people are cheering. What the fuck's going on? And it was from the very first time that TISM played, not counting the TISM's first gig, which was a disaster, but after that, from the very first moment. Now, I'm not going to go into it any more than that, but certainly to try and answer your question, there was this complete no ramp. It was like a giant step, and so that's probably why I'm always just that guy in Abros. I'm still that guy in Abros, and it still strikes me as really odd that people like the stuff I do, and I can't really get over that. it's not false modesty where I'm yes, anyone who says it's not false modesty is being falsely modest. But like, I don't really secretly think, yes, the world owes me a living, and finally they are, it's just probably part of that is spending 20 years in a mask. So, you're not that person they're cheering at. You take the mask off and go home and no one gives a fuck again, which is as it should be. That's what real life is. So I consider myself incredibly lucky. I know that I'm only here having this chat to you because of TISM and so I can't, and I owe to TISM my subsequent career, the 20 years post TISM. The only reason that exists is because of the fame that TISM and the people that came on board. So I consider myself very lucky that I was in that band, and it's given me the opportunity to have a career. And so I think I'll never lose that sense of, really there, but for the grace of God, I could still be that guy in Abros who is doing a fucking shit version of the Proclaimers across the road from my house. That's still how I feel.
I'm not going to sort of, I guess, spend too much time on TISM because that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about some more sort of, I guess, contemporary matters. But I guess as a way of leaning into that, TISM did split in 2004, but I'm guessing at that point you'd never expected a reunion to sort of occur down the line. But at that moment, what were you sort of thinking? Were you thinking, I need a new musical outlet? Or were you sort of thinking, I'm now free to sort of be myself after having to be someone else for so long? Like,
Yeah.
I'm assuming there were a lot of thoughts going through your head, really.
Yeah. It was. I think it was a period of. I think it was one night's sleep, where I came home from the what's it called? I think it's the Crosstown Hotel in Carnegie, where I had the discussion with the man known as Ron about the decision. And I went home and I told my wife Jane that what had happened, and she was sort of sorry for me. Like she showed sympathy, and it was the first time that it struck me that this is actually a sad event or whatever. I'd just kind of gone home thinking, oh, okay, well, that's what's sort of happening, and then went to bed, just nothing. Like I was just thinking, oh, well, I've got to go to work on Monday and life carries on. But the next day I woke up and thought, I want to keep making music. So it wasn't really something I had thought about until my life as I'd known it had gone. And it went, by the way. I think I'm glad it went. I wasn't sort of sad that it went. I think that it's a good thing that it went at the time, because otherwise it would have just kind of gradually petered out. So good to sort of end with a bang. But yeah, I woke up the next day and I went, I want to keep doing music. I don't know exactly what that means, but it was a really kind of exciting moment in my head, because I was able to sort of go, like, what does that mean? How is that going to actually work? And it was almost like the creation of not my new persona, but almost like, I think you put it in the question, now I get to be me. That was really sort of the feeling I had. But figuring out what me was would actually take me a rather long time. But that initial thought of, okay, I'm going to do it. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's going to work or be successful, but I want to do it. That was a very exciting feeling.
Because the next project that we did sort of see from you was Root, which I guess somewhat ironically, you were hiding behind a moniker again. So it's like, I guess, why did you not decide to come out as Damian Cowell? Like, why did you sort of feel the need again to sort of say, actually, I'm DC Root?
Yeah. So that's a very pertinent question, Tyler, because I was too afraid to come out of the closet completely. So I had to have, because it was a big step for me, nearly 20 years of being in a mask, and suddenly it's like I'm beginning my music career, sort of in my 30s. And so um I needed a crutch. I needed trainer wheels on my bike. So the trainer wheels were a pseudonym and a hat and a costume of sorts, and even the musical, the musical backdrop that was Root was all kind of like insulation, protection for me, because launching yourself out at that point was a really sort of scary concept. And I can very much remember the feeling of Root's first gig, which was at a place called the Spanish Club in Johnson Street. And it was this like a it was like a whole bunch of bands. I can't remember exactly what the theme was, but it was like a whole day of bands, and people were kind of coming in and out and watching bands. The most well-known band on the bill was a band called Little Red, who were sort of the next big thing at that point, but I don't think really ever turned into that. But they were on the bill. But yeah, Root, we came on. I think we only did a short set, but I remember that feeling as we were about to go on was like this total bungee jump moment, because here I was going out, and, let's face it, if I was even vaguely cool or attractive looking, I had long lost that power by the time I was getting out there and in front of an audience. So I certainly didn't feel like I had a lot to sell, but it all sort of went okay. And but yeah, everything about it was insulation from the fear of the unknown. If we had been booed at that first gig, I don't reckon I would have had the guts to push on. Thank God we didn't get booed, and so we sort of I had the courage to keep going, but it was pretty scary.
I guess then as well, there is the slight, again, irony of the fact that, you are sort of launching yourself out there as a new musical project, but you did also have the fact that like TISM did have a bit of a rusted on fan base, that these people were still going to come out and see your new project. So you were sort of able to avoid any sort of booing in that sense, weren't you?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
obviously word of the project did, seep out there. It's not like it was a complete guarded secret.
Yeah. But, I didn't know if those people would boo me, because like, what's going on? Nobody knew that TISM didn't exist. So what is this? The guy from TISM is unmasked. That's a pretty shit look. So I fully, because I am Mr. Pessimist, I naturally went. I had all those permutations in my head. What if there's an enormous backlash from TISM fans um, who just think this is an insult to the legacy or whatever? I even had a chat with TISM's former manager, who kind of was of that opinion. So, not that he expressed it that way, but so I genuinely felt it was possible that I might get a huge backlash, but I wasn't doing it all by myself. So I have to point out that Henry Graver was a very key influence at this point in my life, and I've always been attracted to people with big personalities, and Henry has a big personality, and thank God, so he's a very he's I mean, he's sort of mellowed a little bit, but certainly at the time he would just sort of go, well, fuck it, don't worry about it. Let's just do it. And, fuck it. So having someone with me like that probably would have helped me get over if they had booed, I guess. But yes, I certainly had no idea. As it turns out, it didn't go that way. And yes, I had therefore the opportunity to continue my musical career because I already had people interested in what I was going to do. And I'm lucky. So, bands like Tall Stories or I Can Run didn't start with a fan base. I started with an admittedly rather whittled down, but nonetheless existing group of people who would come along, make the effort, and be interested in what I was doing. So once I got over the initial jitters, it was very exciting to know that whatever I do, at least some people will be listening.
Because from there, like obviously Root has a couple of albums and everything, and then you do decide to start another project, which is the DC3.
Yeah.
Now that one, you were actually confronting it head on. You were basically saying, like, the first single is "I Was the Guy in TISM." So why did you have this sort of shift at that point? Like, why did you go from the previous project where you're sort of just like, I'm going to obfuscate it, and this one, you're going to address it? Seems like a bit of polar opposites.
Yeah. So obviously, I had grown in confidence by this point, and even in the 2-album career of Root, the first album was me trying to deliberately, like, I didn't choose the country thing just by being a pure dilettante. It wasn't, what's the furthest thing removed from TISM, country music. I was actually listening to country. Henry and I were kind of listening to country music at the time, but it was a very conscious attempt to not sound. The last thing I wanted to do was have people compare me to TISM, because that's a fight I am never going to win, right? So therefore, I wanted to be, again, insulated. But by the time we got to the second album, which is Surface Paradise, there's not a lot of country on that album at all. And I was even starting to go back to using samples and, loops and things like that. It was still very much a kind of a rock album. But so I was clearly starting to get more comfortable in the new shoes I was wearing, and comfortable being me. And being me was not the persona that is in TISM. The me is similar, but also different as well. So the whole so the reason the DC3 happened was because, Root was kind of went on its usual trajectory. Clearly, that those early bands, 2 albums, is all we're good for. But I suppose I felt it had run its course. But also, it was a bit difficult because there were. It was like Henry and I were kind of a songwriting team, but it was very much like 4 people with creative, or 5 people wanting to have creative input. And it seems to me, in the history of pop, rock, whatever music, if you get beyond 2, it's a struggle. You may do your research and prove me wrong on this, but I think that it works best. Songwriting or conceptualizing a band works best when there's one leader or where there's a partnership. When there's more than 2, when it gets to like 4 or 5, that's when it's like a battle of egos. I was actually thinking the other day about this and how I can think of 2 examples where clearly that ended up in splitting. They're not great examples, but they're the only 2 examples I can think of. One is 10cc, where they split asunder into 2, the Goldman and Stewart stayed as 10cc, and Godley and Cream became Godley and Cream. And the other example, which is much more shit, is Tears for Fears. I think the two of the guys in Tears for Fears. So I think there is some precedent. So Root was kind of like that, was going that way, and Henry and I just really wanted to break off and do our own thing. And Doug was kind of it sort of worked with Doug. We could stretch it to 3 people with Doug, but not any more than that. So there was that kind of creative thing that happened. TC3, by the way, is such a shit name. Like I came up with later on, I came up with the future sound of nostalgia, which I really wished I'd called that band that, but we were doing a gig and we needed a name in 5 minutes flat, and that was the one that came up. It was just, one of those things I so regret. But so yes, and why I was the guy in TISM? Well, I had this problem at the time where I was mentioning the fact like when you get asked, when you're trying to get a gig and you're asked for the bio and you have to write in sort of like 4 lines what the band is, putting the thing about being in TISM was mandatory, because otherwise who would give a fuck? And so I had to do that, but I didn't want to talk about being in TISM. I didn't want to, as I mentioned before, I didn't want to be that guy TISM quick quote that you could just ring up and chat about the good old days. So I had this sort of stupid, vain idea that if I put it into a song, I won't have to have that conversation ever again where I go, by the way, I was in TISM, but I don't really want to talk about it. And I made a joke out of it, like pretending that I was the one who wrote all the good bits and not the bad bits. It was my attempt to get that out of the way. I'm not sure that it was successful, and there are some people who think that that I was actually serious when I wrote that song. But yeah, that was sort of the reason to try and get, like, I thought if that song's out there, then no one will ever ask me, no one will ever need me to mention, because I was totally wrong. Not that long ago, I got asked by the lovely Zan Rowe to be on this top 5 songs thing or whatever, and clearly she asked me because I was that guy who was in TISM, and I regret doing that, because then it was a really uncomfortable conversation where I was trying to dodge talking about TISM the whole time. I got invited to lunch by Jane Gazzo, who wanted to write a book, and I erroneously thought for a few seconds that she wanted to write a book about me. Of course she didn't. She wanted to write a book about TISM. It was kind of like, when you're at a party and a girl starts talking to you and you erroneously feel that she's got some romantic interest in you, but in fact you discover that she really does want to know what the time is. So yeah, that was the I was the guy in TISM. Perhaps I should have called it I was one of the guys in TISM, but that just doesn't really
scan that well, does it?
Yeah, no. And plus, I was kind of being cheeky because I did feel a sense from some of the other members that, I shouldn't trade on the band's name. So I was it was a tiny bit of a finger up, as well as me getting that point across that now I don't have to talk about it. And then, yeah, from there it was, the DC3 was a very different, initially, a very different thing to Root in that we didn't have a drummer, and so it was very much. And at that time, I was a band that had quite a big impact on me at the time was LCD Sound System, and LCD Sound System made me interested in dance music again, because I had been hugely interested in dance music during TISM, and then sort of kind of went away from it a bit afterwards. But LCD Sound System made dance music cool again, at least to me. And so I started sort of trying to kind of introduce that a bit into the sound of DC3. Certainly on the first album. By the time we did the second album, which was, Traces of Nut, that just sounds like this kind of, I don't know, indie band or something. But yeah, it was very much this is again this sense I've got through my career post TISM of me sharpening the idea of what exactly me is with the help of Henry and Doug.
And actually, before I go on to my next question, I suppose I should also say you mentioned before about someone writing a book about TISM. I don't know who the hell would bother with that. I mean, that's such a fool's errand, isn't it?
Yeah, fuck yeah. Yeah, that's right.
I
Yeah.
should promote my book at the end. I guess my next question for you, though, also actually, I thoroughly enjoy the mention of LCD Sound System. I was listening to a little bit of them yesterday, actually.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful band. But I guess you do mention this sort of love of dance music, and then because the next project is the Disco Machine, which again, disco is dance music. When we get down to it, so obviously you've got this love of dance music, and also this time you're completely it's head on. It's like Damian Cowell's Disco Machine. It's like there is no, you know what you're getting right from the start. It's you. It's disco, and there's a machine involved, I guess. But I mean, why? I think the best way to sort of ask the question, but I guess you mentioned in the past why you love disco music and why it sort of appeals to you. So I'm not going to ask you to sort of go through all that, but I guess why did it appeal to you so much that you sort of pigeonholed yourself into a genre box with this project? Like, why did you want to just say, "This is me, and I'm just doing disco"?
Yeah, I don't know. That's not a very good answer to your question, is it? But it was circumstance also. Like, so DC3 ended because Henry gave up, kind of gave up music. He was going through a pretty full-on time in his life, and both Root and the DC3 had this sort of trajectory, which was you go up a little bit and then it peters out. And some gigs were great, and other gigs were 15 people in Toowoomba. I always use that as an example. One of the low. Actually, there was one girl who was amazing there. We spoke to her afterwards, and she said that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And it's moments like that stick with you. But at the time, like driving in the rain to the venue and stuff and back, it was kind of like. So Henry's decision to quit meant that, and I guess Doug sort of with it, meant that I was on my own. So whether I would have arrived at Damian Cowell's Disco Machine if Henry had still, I don't think so, because Henry and Doug weren't into dance music nearly as much or at all, really. It was my thing. And so being on my own meant that I could sort of go down that path. And then as you say, the disco thing happened again by accident. I sort of remembered how much fun disco music was. And it was really just sort of like I didn't think that far ahead, but I kind of went, maybe what I was thinking at the time was that I don't feel I can be on top of dance music now. This is, we're talking about, when was this? It was like 2013 or something. I didn't feel like at 2013, like I had felt in 1993, that I knew what the cutting edge dance music was. I didn't sort of feel like that anymore. So to make a dance album that was in any way attempting to be like modern dance music, I sort of didn't feel like I had the tools to do that. So it was kind of comforting to go. Disco is a very confined genre, and it was really just one album concept. I never really thought. I just thought it was a name, really, that I could. So we'll start off channeling the 70s, and in particular, a certain kind of disco music. So disco music means a whole lot of things, particularly now. And even sort of in the 70s, you had sort of so-called authentic disco music, which, you sort of chic or whatever. And then you had your trashy disco music, which is Boney M. And I actually like both equally. I got Boney M records in my collection. And so I thought I can sit comfortably in this because it's daggy. And so I felt that was very much at home. I was very much at home in that sort of, I can just have this daggy, but I didn't think that anyone would assume that I was going to be a disco band. And therefore, that's why you don't see us wearing, medallions and open neck. Like, it's not a disco pastiche or anything. The only thing disco about Damian Cowell's Disco Machine is the name. And gradually, over the course of the band, from the first to the second to the third album, those elements of so-called disco disappear. I had on the first album certain things which I had as a nod to my trashy disco, like those kind of fast string section arpeggios, that kind of thing, and very much that sort of the flat disco drum sound, and kind of disco bass lines. But by the time the second album came, I wasn't doing that anymore either. And when I got together with David Williams, as a result of the TISM reformation and or the TISM reissue and so forth, and he was interested enough in taking me on in my career. He was actually of the opinion that the word disco was putting people off, which may be true, but isn't really. It's it was a pigeonhole that I wasn't aware of, but I can see how you would think it might be a pigeonhole, and maybe it stopped. But the Disco Machine is the most successful post-TISM project I've had, just purely based on the size of our shows, the kind of gigs we got, and sort of record sales, if you can use that concept. So we definitely had something, but yeah, maybe it pigeonholed me. But honestly, I've always felt that I'm a niche artiste, really.
No, that's understandable. Now, I guess, something I have noticed just as we've been talking is that each of the projects that you sort of do, you seem to sort of have a bit of a thread that goes back to the previous one, like before it, and you sort of keep bringing something along with it. Now, this latest project that you've got is the Arseless Chaps, which has Tony Martin, who was also in the Disco Machine. So there's always a little bit of a thread that keeps on going. Now, I believe that you guys had used the Arseless Chaps name back when I think you spoke on Triple R years ago. There was like a brief couple of weeks where I think you and Tony were sort of talking on a Sunday afternoon or something. Now, the name has come about of this new project. So,
Yeah.
where did the idea of this Arseless Chaps project come from? What made you sort of decide, you know what, me and Tony, let's put something together here?
Yeah. So I did a little. The Disco Machine ended mainly because Beck Chapman, who was one of the fabulous people in the band, very sensibly told me that she was pursuing various things in her career that meant that she wouldn't have time to enough time to devote to my band, which, let's face it, was a good career move. And I absolutely told her that at the time. It's like, what am I fucking offering you? There's like 6 gigs a year, and I could never pay anyone in the band what they really deserved and stuff. So, but because Beck was not involved anymore, I kind of felt like it was sort of a drawing a line. And also, I sort of felt that I needed something new. And that was also when I got together with David. And David said, you should drop this disco thing. Okay, so I did a tour as Damian Cowell with a band that was almost entirely the Disco Machine, just not called that. And this is a very pragmatic answer, but we lost money. We did a tour and hemorrhaged money. So I basically went, okay, there's never a question about me continuing to do music. Like, I'm going to continue to do music until dementia kicks in. But I I can't sustain having a big band in my life anymore. It's just not viable, especially now when, it's really hard to get people to come to shows anyway. So yeah, I had in my head, right, whatever I'm going to do. And I just sort of thought, well, Tony and I are sort of peas in a pod. And even though we're in completely different worlds, we really kind of we get along fantastically. What is really important about me and Tony is mutual respect. We have this mutual respect. And so I just sort of thought, if we get together, we can make it work. It's economically sensible, right? You can get one hotel room, but what is that going to be? And it was, okay, this is me, and me being me is dance music, electronic dance music. So now I am finally being me in a way. I'd always had the need to have the insulation of other people around me. I've got another person with me, like it's Tony. So therefore, he's not a musical force, even though he is capable of singing, and I'm trying to encourage him in that more. But really, the songs come from me. The songs in the Disco Machine came from me as well. But now I am purely writing for an electronic sound, and that's where I'm happiest. So I think the reason the Arseless Chaps exists is A, pragmatism, but also B, I'm finally really doing what I should have done when I left TISM. I had to get there via this slow process of osmosis. So the thread that you mentioned is me kind of figuring out, this is the music I do best. And it goes back to me strumming that fucking fireplace shovel, in that I always wanted to create the whole sound myself. And it's a bit of a disease, and it makes my relations with other people involved in music fraught with difficulty, because that's the way I think. And the comparison between music and painting, I actually think sort of works, because you don't normally have it's not kind of the idea with painting that you get a really big canvas and you give 4 people paintbrushes and you go, right, paint. And then out of it comes this masterpiece. That's not how painting works. And that's the struggle of creating something with other people, is that if you want to be the painter and you've got other people fucking painting over on the left-hand side in brown, how's that painting going to end up being what you had in your head? So this is my opportunity to do that. And Arseless Chaps is, because of Tony's presence in the band, it's obviously people are going to expect it to be funny. And there is that element to it, but it's not a comedy act. It's I'm hoping that bits of it people will find funny, and therefore Tony has a whole kind of fan base, which I hope find something in Arseless Chaps to like. But my part of it is the songs and the singing, which I do obviously. But the songs, I'm really at the moment, I'm quite proud of. I think they're me doing the sort of thing I actually really like best, at least in terms of writing, not in terms of, I don't only listen to dance music, but I write dance music better than I can't really write rock music very well. I need other people to do it. But dance music, I feel confident. So that's what we're going out as. It's like inhabiting this weird netherworld, which kind of, if you like what I do, if you've followed my career, both in that famous band and outside that famous band, I guess hopefully you'll have an appreciation that, TISM was never a joke act, and I'm not a joke act. It's somewhere in the netherworld between serious music and jokes. It's because some of the songs that you'll hear in Arseless Chaps, just the same as like some of the songs on Disco Machine tracks. It's fucking dark as all hell, but delivered in that sort of way that we're kind of having fun with it. That's that weird territory I operate in, and Tony describes it really well. And he sort of says that's a very difficult territory to be in, and it's generally not appreciated by people who don't follow the journey. People who only give it 5 minutes notice will assume that this is a comedy act. So, I don't know, it mightn't work in that sense, but that's sort of the thinking behind it anyway.
I am glad you mentioned that, because actually one of the questions I actually had for you was the fact that, Tony's known for comedy, and there is the fact that, and I mean, I will always vehemently rage against the concept that TISM have been viewed as a joke band. But I mean, I can only assume that you will have these preconceptions going in. So, like, is there anything particular that you are trying to do to actually sort of make sure that that people aren't viewing it as a joke band, or are you just sort of a bit sorry, I use that phrase, I didn't even mean to. Like, you obviously don't want people coming into it thinking, oh, this is going to be a bit of a chuckle fest, because you are wanting to make sure it's, first and foremost, people are aware that it's going to be mainly musical. That is the idea.
Yeah, and it's difficult, Tyler. It's not it it might not work. But there are clear ways in which, like, I'm not saying that this is Radiohead or anything, so like it's not going to be a glum, serious night of entertainment. I hope it works on two levels. So the people who come who like a chuckle will get their good dose of chuckle. But some of the stuff that Tony is actually contributing lyrics as well as me. And some of the lyrics that Tony is contributing are more monologues, and they're humorous monologues, but they're not like his stand-up act. So it's not Tony doing his stand-up act over a musical track. It's not kind of that. So yes, there is that humorous element, but the way to try and hopefully make it work is best described actually by the conversation that I had. We did a gig in Brisbane. Our sort of debut performance was in Brisbane late last year, and we didn't have our own crew or anything. Like, this is a shoestring operation, and so I had to have a conversation with the guy who was mixing us. Sort of what's the idea here? Like, he didn't ask me to have this conversation. I had to have this conversation. I think it's quite symbolic. I said to him, make the music as loud as you would if you were mixing a rock band. When you go and see a rock band, you can't actually hear all the words, right? But if you go to a comedy act, the difference between, like, a musical comedy act, the vocals are by nature have to be heard. You have to get the jokes. So I said to him, don't think this is a musical comedy act. Make the music really loud. I want people's pants to wobble, like, this is full on banging dance music. And I want people to go, what I really hope is that people react in a way that I would react if I was hearing dance music, which is, I want to move. That's kind of what I want. And then on top of that, the icing on the cake is that there's bits that are funny. I mean, we're funny to look at anyway, unintentionally or whatever. The idea of Tony sort of dancing around in this kind of Flavor Flav outfit is inherently silly. So we're not meant to be taken that seriously. But I want people to be confused in a very happy way. I want them to go, those tracks were better than I was expecting. Like those songs are actually, they're still in my head when I'm going home. I want to sing Bossa Gawi when I go home. You know, if that happens, then I've done my job.
See, there was actually one thing that I remember finding really surprisingly enjoyable about actually seeing Tony performing at the Disco Machine is that, for years of listening to him on the radio, every time he would sing, he slipped into a bit of a Cockney accent. He wasn't using the Cockney accent in the Disco Machine, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming he's not really using it with
No.
Arseless Chaps either, is he? So,
Yeah.
how did you manage to sort of break him free from this prison of Cockney?
Yeah, that's a funny idea actually. I think he does the Cockney accent. It's a lot of his sort of comedic songs are very kind of knees up Mother Brownie sort of vibe, and that's probably his comfortable place.
That's his insulation, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly. Yeah, I shouldn't really, I shouldn't speak for him, but there is an element of this is different. And he came to Disco Machine as well with a sense that I am in Damian's world. And so therefore we kind of work our way through it. And this is different again to Disco Machine. So I would imagine people are expecting what Tony did in the Disco Machine was he kind of would come on halfway and be sort of like the comic relief. But he is one half of this project. So that's taken a little bit of work because that's very much, at the risk of using the term I hate, it's taking him out of his comfort zone. But he's really he's going really well at it, and he's kind of gaining more confidence because he doesn't feel anymore, I think, that he is just a guest on Damian's patch. And the more we kind of progress, hopefully that'll come across. Like people will come along and they'll go, oh, okay, that's not the Tony, certainly not the Cockney voice. It's not the Tony I was expecting, but it's still a good Tony, and it's a work in progress. Because, it's like for me, if I was doing stand-up with him, that's what he's going through, really. If I was standing on that fucking stage trading off one-liners with Tony, where he is a master of his world, I'd be feeling pretty fucking scared, So he's moved over into my territory, and I am continually showing him through our actions that he belongs. So yeah, that's why I really like it, because I think it's not just me doing my thing. He's actually contributing a really significant part to it.
And then last year, you obviously mentioned that you did have the debut performance of the Arseless Chaps last year. Now we do have some more shows coming up, which is, I guess, one of the main reasons that we're talking. Because
Yeah.
why not do a bit of
Yeah.
promotion while going deep into the musical history? So I guess you've sort of touched on it a little bit, but if anyone is sort of coming along a little bit unsure of what to expect, what can they expect from an Arseless Chaps show?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I suppose it's fun and sort of banging tunes, big fat banging dance music, but fun at the same time. In a way, it's sort of like what the Disco Machine was doing. That was kind of the aim of the Disco Machine, is to is essentially fun. So what we're promising is a fun night, and at the very least, if you just have a laugh at seeing two stupid old men dancing around, then that's fine. You'll go home happy. But I would like to also think that people will be surprised by how good Tony is in this situation, and by how big the songs are. These are big, fat songs. Is the only way I can describe them. And and there's even a couple of, and I mentioned before, some of it's quite dark, but disguised, as I always do, as kind of puerile silliness.
I mean, you can't avoid it, can you?
That's right. Yeah.
Should actually just say, like you mentioned before about just the idea of like, folks coming along and seeing these like, these two old blokes making music. I think it was only announced a few days ago, but have you heard of that English hip hop duo, Pete and Baz, at all?
No. No.
They're these two English gentlemen in their, I think their late 70s. I could be wrong.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're apparently coming to Melbourne as part of the Rising Festival, and I couldn't help but sort of think of the comparison. I mean, obviously it's a bit of difference in age, so I'm not trying by any
Yeah,
means to
yeah.
say you're that old, but yeah, I was just sort of thinking about that, and that's the sort of thing where when I first actually discovered them, someone showed them to me about 5 years ago, and I thought I'm actually very surprised by what I'm hearing. Like it's quite good,
Right.
and I don't
Yeah.
know. This could be a very laboured way of saying if people are surprised by them, they'll probably be surprised by what they're going to get at the Arseless Chaps. That's a terrible pitch to give, but I suppose I should also ask, as a bit of a final question on that topic, I guess apart from these live performances, is there any sort of idea of what the future holds for it? Will there be recorded music at all, or is it remaining a live entity?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like we've got three-quarters of an album done. So still a bit of work to do, but just depending on, I mean, the idea of releasing an album is ridiculous these days, but I just pursue it because that's what I like doing. And that's part of this sort of so-called auteur process. I think about the album and the track listing and all that sort of stuff because that's what's fun. So we will do these shows. The idea was to hopefully make enough money to finance completing the album. And then we might sort of do some more shows later in the year. Maybe we'll have an album celebration gig or something. So it's definitely an ongoing process. And the live performance is all of this is it's a Trojan horse for me getting my songs out there. That's really what drives me. So the two old blokes dancing silly and the humour and the ex-TISM and all of these things are all just the convenient clothes horse on which I drape my slightly humble pants. And that's what I'm doing it for, is because I really like writing songs. And so yes, we will continue, and if the shows go okay and we've got legs and we can keep going, then it's really a matter of just keeping, we'll do this first album and we'll see what, we might expand after that or we might change. All of my stuff has kind of changed as it's gone along. But yeah, this is definitely an ongoing project.
Wonderful. And I suppose from a marketing point of view, we should say, sure, you might have shows later on in the year, but we're not talking about them right now. Buy tickets to the ones that are coming up in April.
Yeah. Yeah.
So look, I suppose I should get down to the portion of the podcast in which its namesake is derived. So Trusty Chord sees me follow the 1, 3, and 5 structure of a standard chord, ask about one artist that has impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and 5 songs you can turn to. It is pretty much just a bit of wankery for the music nerds out there. But look, my first question for you here, Damien, who is the one musical artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
Yep. So it would have to be the Beatles, which is a terribly boring answer. But, I guess the Beatles turned me into a music fan. So therefore, the rest of my life followed in that way. So, yes, it's terrible, isn't it? It's like everybody must answer the Beatles. But, yes, if not for the Beatles, what would it have been? Fucking Jerry and the Pacemakers? I don't know. So because of the Beatles, I was doomed to a misspent life. So yes, their impact continues to this day.
Actually, funnily enough, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head because I'm thinking of how many episodes I've had so far and everything. I think actually I've only had one person mention the Beatles as the
Really?
one artist, yeah. But I've had more people mention David Bowie, surprisingly. I think
Mm.
by the time this episode goes out, the last 2 of the last 3 episodes would have had people saying David Bowie, which is surprising. But I mean, also another
That's,
influential artist. But yeah, that was also a name I was thinking of a little bit before when you mentioned the idea of these musical partnerships, where it's like they work best when you've got 2. The second you start adding, 3 or 4, it gets a
yes.
bit unstable. That's why the Beatles were best with Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah,
So
exactly. If you
yeah.
look at, I mean, we don't necessarily have time to go down this particular rabbit hole, but if you look at certainly all the artists that I'm going to mention in reference to my musical inspirations, there's usually 1 or 2 people driving it. Jagger Richards, if we're talking about the classic kind of rock era, and certainly dance music is dominated by duos. So yeah, that's my theory. Hopefully not disprovable, but I'm going to stick to it. And David Bowie, of course, was a person with a singular worldview, and so no wonder I was quite amazed at what happened after he died. Like, I didn't realise he had that much of an effect on people.
Mm.
I like David Bowie, but yeah, it was only after his death that I realised that so many people cited him as a major influence. The way in which he influenced me, I reckon, was the chameleon part. That you could be David Bowie and stand for totally different things. Was a concept that he introduced to me. Not that I've necessarily done it, but I've had a country band and a disco band, so I suppose that's a little bit
Well, I
like,
mean, you've never been someone who's standing still, are you? You're always moving in some sort of musical way. You're always sort of, branching out in some capacity.
yeah, and that's what he made cool. So as much as people like the Stones, I mean, the Beatles did that too, though, didn't they? They also had that sense of musical growth. So I always kind of respected artists that could do that. Elvis Costello was another huge influence on me, and he had that too, that ability um, to change along the way and take listeners with him. Um, so so yeah, David Bowie. I mean, David Bowie didn't have any effect on me because when he exploded as Ziggy Stardust and all that, I wasn't really paying much attention. But when he turned from Ziggy Stardust into sort of a R&B act, and then went Berlin, that was wow. That's like this guy who's continually wanting to change, not let anything get stale. So yeah, that certainly is a factor.
My next question for you here is, what are 3 albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums you're always throwing on, or something that was integral to the musical evolution.
Yeah, yeah. So the key word in that question is impacted, because I've got a million albums that I love, and I go back to, or I think in some way influenced my music. But if I only pick ones that made a change in the way I go about my music, then the first would be, and picking an album is an arbitrary, but it'll work for the case of this question.
Mm.
This Year's Model by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. I use the term "and the Attractions" very deliberately because they are, to me, as much a part of the attraction of that artist as Elvis himself. But his effect on me, and I first heard them in, I think, 78 or 79, was that the whole idea of lyrical wordplay had never, I'd never really been aware of it. I'd never really liked artists that were known for their lyrics prior to that. It never really made that much difference to me. He kind of made me go, wow, I should try and do something like that. So that was one. Next one is, I think I mentioned earlier on, Blue Monday, which isn't an album by New Order, but that song and Everything's Gone Green, which was on their first album called Movement, I think, where I heard a drum machine in the context of dark, doomy, industrial, like indie music, was a life-changing moment for me. It was like, right, you can be cool and use a drum machine at the same time. So I went out and bought a drum machine, and you can and Blue Monday in particular. I mean, it is a 12-inch, so hopefully you'll let me use this.
Of course.
You
it's my podcast. I make the damn rules.
Yeah. So, but Blue Monday has, of course, the skipping kick drum intro, which is, of course, the kick drum part for Defecate on My Face. Very deliberately, I was deliberately ripping off New Order. And the reason I loved that was because no drummer, unless they were a metal drummer with 2 kick drums or whatever, that's just not a real drummer kick drum part. That is obviously a drum machine. That whole concept of, it's hard to describe, that whole concept of moving away from real people making music to machines was really exciting and attractive to me. And also because I've realised that I love rhythmic interplay, and rhythmic interplay happens in dance music between the drum machine and, the keyboards or the bass line that interlock and arpeggiate around each other. That creates rhythmic interest, which unlocks certain serotonins in my head. So Blue Monday was the first time I ever experienced that. So that was a biggie. And the next one's a bit obscure, but it's an album called Stella Supreme by Cosmic Baby, who was a German, I think, or was he Belgian?
I think he was German.
I remember. German, yeah. DJ, when I heard that, which was, I think, 1993, it impacted my life in a way that I won't go into a huge amount of detail about, but it was me forcing dance music on TISM. And so that was an incredibly impactful album, even though it's not necessarily a great album or anything, but check it out because I think you can Spotify it. It's got, you might even hear certain things which appear on certain TISM tracks. And I've even gone back to listening to it now because that vibe, that's what I'm doing now in Arseless Chaps, is channeling that same thing that I was channeling back in 1994. So yeah, very long answer there, Tyler.
No, that's completely fine. Actually, well, the Cosmic Baby one, that's actually one I've listened to quite a bit over this last year. I referenced a book earlier. There's a reason I was been listening to this album. Now, my last question for you here is, I'd love to know the 5 songs you can always turn to, whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all. Your 5 trusty songs. But before I actually probably ask you as well, I should actually say that so far on this podcast, I've only had 2 people who have actually had their own songs picked as part of this. One was Dave McCormack from Custard. Someone, a member of my band, actually picked a Custard song as his. And I recently had someone pick a TISM song as one of their 5. However, it was actually one that you're not, your vocals are not. It's a Give Up for Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And so, at the very least, we can say that, you were picked. You're part of the band. But this isn't about that. So, what would your 5 songs be?
By the way, that's lovely. Someone picked "Give Up for Australia." You never hear anyone voting for that song as their favourite song. So,
actually, personally, I've always really liked it. Although the fact there's a hidden track at the end makes it a bit hard to put on the old mixtape or anything. But is what it is.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. So, what are my 5? Okay. So, I think I've chosen things that are a little bit different, I suppose. I tried to, because I knew this question in advance. I'm not just pulling these out of my ass.
You're very prepared, yes.
So So the first song is Autumn Almanac by the Kinks. And there's a number of reasons why I've chosen this, but I think that is, as a pop song, as complete and perfect a pop song as you could possibly write. What I think makes it a perfect, complete pop song, and this is a theme that'll run through a couple of my answers, is that there isn't like a verse and a chorus. Or if there is a verse and a chorus, they're both just as good as each other. It's not like the chorus is the big winner and we're working our way up to the big winner. It's like every bit is as good as the last bit. But Autumn Almanac has about 5 in them. And so what's the fucking verse and what's the bridge or whatever? And it all flows seamlessly from one bit to the next. And Ray Davies, who is the genius behind the Kinks, and I use the term genius very deliberately in a world where this is an overused term. That guy doesn't get the credit that he deserves. He absolutely belongs on the same level as Lennon and McCartney, in my opinion. He did it all himself. But that is the brilliance of that is that he occasionally stretches a chord to allow the lyric to work. So when a lyric demands, he actually bends the music to fit the lyric, which is often the case is the opposite. Lyrics get truncated and no one ever gives a fuck about lyrics, and most pop music, the lyric is just some sort of noise, happy noise on top of the music. But with Ray, it's like both are as important. The lyrics are really good. They're always really good with Ray Davies. I guess the appeal of Ray Davies is often purely for his lyrics, but I want to say that Autumn Almanac is musically, in my opinion, it's a suite, just like Good Vibrations, which is lauded as one of the great suites, and yet you wouldn't really regard it in the same way because it sounds just like this piece of music hall English nostalgia, like so much of the Kinks. And the character that he assumes in Autumn Almanac, like so many of his songs of that period, he appears to be critical, but he's also incredibly sympathetic at the same time. And it's that ambiguity. Like when you take somebody like Damon Albarn, who is not fit to tie the sandal strap of Ray Davies, with Damon Albarn, you can tell he is sneering at the people in his songs. He doesn't have he's a very talented man, Damon Albarn, and he's very good looking and very rich, good on him, but he doesn't have Ray's ability to make you not sure whether Ray is on side, because Ray is living the character as well as being sort of critical of it. So Autumn Almanac is one of the greatest pieces of pop music ever written. So that's why I've got it right up there. I just play it. Every time I play it, I just go, wow, this is I could never write anything as good as this.
You'll always keep on trying, won't you?
I will, yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's one. Number 2 is a similar thing, but in a different genre and probably a surprising choice. But Slade, Goodbye to Jane, to me is like almost a perfect pop song. I think it's got 3 bits in it, and the 3 bits are all as catchy as the last bit. So whether it's the verse or it's kind of like a verse which bridges into a chorus, and they've all got these fabulous hooks. And at the same time, like it's this kind of pounding, simple rock and pop song. I reckon Slade are also super underrated. They came at the wrong time in a way, because they are looked back on now as a sort of historical curiosity, a curio of the glam rock era. But if they'd come around in 1976 and were a punk band, they would be, I think, far more. They would be critically respected, and their songs would work just as well because they had that kind of driving, simple pop hook. So that to me was their greatest. They're also kind of derided because they somehow or other got sort of lumped in with bands like fucking what was that horrible band Twisted Sister or whatever that
Oh,
you
yes.
do Blade covers, that sort
Yeah,
of
of course.
glam metal. People look back, probably classify them as that. But I think they've got a compilation album called Slatest, I think, which you should check out because it's song after song of greatness. But Goodbye to Jane, one of the most perfect pop songs I know. Number 3 is, again, similar vibe, but a very different musical vibe. Girl group music, which I love.
Oh, same here. Huge fan.
And this song is Nothing But a Heartache by the Flirtations. The Flirtations were an American girl group trio who couldn't crack it in the States and went to England, where girl group music, that kind of Motown stuff at the time, like we're talking 1966, 67, was huge because of the Northern Soul scene. And I think they actually recorded Nothing But a Heartache in England with an English producer, and it became a huge hit. And what I love about that song is not only like it's in the girl group, like it's got that driving kind of, if you like the Motown beat, even though it wasn't on Motown, but and it's also got that thing I was talking about with the previous 2 songs where it's just doesn't seem to have a verse. It's just like 3 choruses in a row. So it's like upbeat, this really catchy upbeat. But the other thing I love about it is the brass arrangement, which is, to me, reminiscent of English TV themes of the era, in particular kind of cop show themes, that sort of like these kind of big, outrageous trumpets and saxophones. I don't know, like the Sweeney or Minder or whatever. I'm not sure. It's just got that kind of, or the Protectors or whatever, sort of slightly over the top hysteria about the whole track. So yeah, that's Nothing But a Heartache. Fabulous track, like drama. It's got this aura of drama about it that's wonderful. Okay, number 4 is Disco Inferno by Tramps. So that is the power of a bass line. So when I was like 17 or whatever and going to blue light discos, even though I thought at the time I hated disco music, when they put on Disco Inferno, I was always dancing, and that is the power of a bass line. And that bass line has been ripped off a number of times, including by me, on a track called Folk Music Turns Me Into a Fascist, but also most notably by LCD Sound System on one of my favourite tracks of theirs, which is called Yeah. It's a total rip-off of the Disco Inferno bass line, and I don't care. Like I don't give a shit about rip-offs. If you take something and make it into your own, then it's fine. And LCD Sound System do a fabulous job on Yeah. It starts off with that bass line, and then like halfway through the track, it goes from real instruments to electronic instruments, in particular one synth where they basically spend about 4 minutes doing the filter thing, which probably sounds very boring to the listener, but I just love that track. But it all comes down to the fabulous groove. And I think Tramps probably never did anything remotely as good as Disco Inferno, but I defy anyone who is at a dance to remain motionless when that track kicks in. By the way, that's right. The intro of a track is really important. So Disco Inferno has the descending line dun, 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 pow, right? The intro of a track can sometimes be like, obviously that had the effect on me that makes you want to get up and dance. It also works for Autumn Almanac. Starts off with this kind of like a really shithousely recorded acoustic guitar intro, really great intro, nothing but a heartache. Starts with these portentous piano chords. Dun, 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 dun. And that was actually ripped off by the Small Faces in my favourite song of theirs, which is called Tin Soldier. In the middle section, the middle of that song, it goes off in a different direction. It's the same. I wonder actually if they did it before the Flotations. You'll have to look that one up, Tyler. But by the way, Tin Soldier almost made the cut because that is a song I also think has that ability to go like, it does have a clear verse, but the verse is great. Like, even if it had had a shit chorus after that verse, it would still be a great song, but it goes up and it goes up again. Great song. But yes, the power of a great intro. And I'm up to number 5. Number 5 doesn't follow that at all, but I picked something that, so I've kind of gone girl group music, 60s pop, hard rock, and disco. I also really like music that has atmosphere. And sometimes when I'm in a particular mood, that's what I really want, and I really want music that evokes a certain mood. Quite often it's sort of a chilled out or puts me in another place. And so this song does that. It's by Simple Minds and it's called Theme for Great Cities. And it's an instrumental track on their album Sister Feelings Call, I think, which was an album I absolutely came out with a companion album, which was a really cool idea. I played those to death back in, I don't know when it was, about 81 or 82.
Yeah, 81, yeah.
81. And Theme for Great Cities is an instrumental track and, helpful of the chaps to give it that title because then it sort of opens the door about where your mind should go. But it's the best driving music. Like I can just I go off up out of the ceiling and fly across the sky, and I'm on a giant train going from Rome to Istanbul or something. And this is the music that takes me there. It's got that. What does it is the 3 chords, I think, on this sort of ethereal sounding synth, but it's also got this driving bass line by Derek Forbes, who was the best thing about Simple Minds. They had during that era, they had a fantastic kind of, it wasn't exactly dance music, but it was very danceable. And it had all those things that I love, which is the interlocking of all the parts. So the drums don't make the groove. It's what you put on top of the drums that makes the groove. So that's a perfect example of fabulous groove music, but also atmosphere.
Wonderful. Those are some really wonderful choices, actually. It's and I'm sure it'd also be a very nice bit of musical education for a few folks who aren't aware of the the Flotations or how good Slade can be as well. Definitely
Yeah.
a very underrated band at times.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope somebody goes out and has a listen to some of those things. Might not be their cup of tea, but yeah, it's. I just love talking about great music and how it sort of affects me. So answering those, thinking about the answers to those questions, I went and played the songs again, and thanks heaps for asking me, Tyler, because
Cool.
it's so much fun. Great when you're vacuuming, really.
Of course. Well, I suppose I should wrap up by saying, Damian Cowell, thank you so very much for your time today and also for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast.
Thanks very much, Tyler. It's been great to bang on about myself, and I hope it hasn't gone on too long.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you listened to this episode and enjoyed it, I would really appreciate it if you were able to take a few moments to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. As always, there's no obligation to do so, but I am forever grateful if you do. As always, I'm over on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word, and I've also got a blog on my website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's TYLERJENKE/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. You probably know by now what you can find on that blog, but it includes all the pertinent information about this week's episode, including the artist, albums, and songs all chosen by Damian this week. Lastly, I do need to thank Damian Cowell for spending some time with me this week for the podcast, because it's always a true pleasure to chat. I'd also be remiss not to mention that I actually have my debut book arriving on May 1st, which is a volume of the 33 1/3 Oceania series, and it's on TISM's 1995 album Machiavelli and the Four Seasons. You can head along to the Bloomsbury website to find that one. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.